Hello, I am Miss Hallgarth and thank you for clicking on this video. In today's video, what we're going to go through is Carol Ann Duffy's War Photographer. As we go through this video, feel free to pause at any point and copy down the annotations into your own poem. What I suggest you do now, before we begin, is get your poem, get some coloured pens, and let's begin. So the first stanza says, "In his dark room he is finally alone, with spools of suffering set out in ordered rows. The only light is red and softly glows." So we'll go through lines 1 to 3 together. So the first annotation I would like you to highlight is the phrase "in his dark room." So this creates an intimate and tranquil setting of his dark room. He's normally surrounded by chaos and values his time alone. There's enjambment, which creates a sense of reflection. So the enjambment is when the phrase "finally alone with spools" runs into the next line. We're now going to highlight "finally alone." This is word choice of alone. This place of peace and sanctuary is being confronted with horrors. Okay, so there's syntax. This isolates the word, which amplifies the isolation. So syntax is the way something looks on a page. "Finally alone" is at the end of the line. It offers him peace. So there's a sense of contrast here. It emphasizes how isolated he is feeling. The next one is "spools of suffering set out in ordered rows." So this is alliteration of the S. Now remember, alliteration is a repetition of a certain sound. Here we have the alliteration of the S, which could be considered sibilance. If you're unsure, alliteration is absolutely acceptable. This draws attention to the horrific images and the fact that this war photographer is trying to restore order to the chaotic images that he sees. So ordered rows contrast against the disorderly things that he has witnessed and photographed. Finally, we have "only light is red and softly glows." There's connotations of the light that burns in Catholic churches here, and this symbolises a presence of Christ. Also, we can see the word of red, the word choice of red. This shows that he's seen a lot of violence. This mimics the red and the blood he's perhaps seen and photographed himself. The ordered rows again mimics a church benches. So the "softly glows" and "ordered rows" rhymes, and this is a mimicking of a church environment. The next part of the first stanza says, "As though this were a church and he a priest preparing to intone a mass. Belfast, Beirut, Phnom Penh, all flesh is grass." As though this were a church and he were a priest preparing to intone mass is religious imagery again. We have this church-like setting, this place of sanctuary for the war photographer, and this simile compares him to a priest itself. So there's a sense of ritual in the way that he develops the photographs, the film, and it shows that he's seen very difficult things, just in the same respect that a priest would have when preparing for communion. The next thing I would like to highlight is one-word sentences for each war zone that he has photographed. Each gets its own sentence, so it's a one-word sentence, a minor sentence, and this is to highlight how important it is to remember these places. He's listed them off to show the sheer amount of things that he's seen and the different types of film that he has developed. The last sentence is a short sentence. It's "all flesh is grass." This is from the New Testament, so it links back to this religious imagery again, and this emphasises how fragile life is and that all must die. The word choice of "flesh" is very emotive. This brings the reader back to the war zone and the explicit violence the photographer has witnessed. So that is our first stanza. Feel free to pause, copy down the annotations, and we'll move on to the next. The next part of the stanza says, "He has a job to do, solutions slop in trays beneath his hands which do not tremble then and though seem to now. Rural England, home again." I'd like you to highlight "he has a job to do." This is a short sentence. This breaks the calmness of the church setting. The dark room reminds him of his responsibilities, and the short sentence shows how he detaches his feelings. So the next stanza opens with this short sentence. It's impactful, and it also shows this impact of his job. He must keep his feelings out of the role that he has to play. Solution slops and trays again is alliteration. There's an ambiguous meaning here. Could this be the chemicals used in his hopes that the pictures may develop and resolve the conflicts they depict? Or solution slop, could this be chemicals that he has witnessed being used in warfare such as Vietnam? The enjambment carries on, so the trays are beneath his hands, which do not tremble then, though seen to now. So in order to do his job, again, he must remain detached and professional. We see characterization here, perhaps hints at PTSD, that he's alone and his emotions get the best of him when he can see the pictures for himself. Rural England, home again. We'll go on to the second part of the second stanza now. So the second stanza would have had enjambment from home again to ordinary pain, which simple weather can dispel, to fields which don't explode beneath the feet of running children in a nightmare heat. So we're going to highlight that fourth sentence in the second stanza. So, to ordinary pain which simple weather cannot dispel. He notes the contrast between home and war zones here. Our problems are sorted by good weather, so there's a sense of bitterness there when he has seen real suffering in these war zones. So we would have word choice of ordinary and word choice of simple there. To fields which don't explode beneath the feet. This is an elaboration that our children do not have to worry about landmines whilst playing, a tone of resentment again, and sudden realisation. So we can have don't explode as our phrase that we can pick out there. Of running children in a nightmare heat. So there's a famous photo of kids running from a napalm attack in Vietnam, and this was helped to end the conflict. So a lot of protest movements use this picture to help invoke sympathy from the public to end the conflict in Vietnam and America. But now we've become desensitized to these images, especially with media, so it means nothing to us now. The word choice of nightmare highlights that privilege makes us understand this horror as a reality. So there's frustration in this sense that he feels like the public don't respond to these explicit images anymore because we're desensitized to them. The next stanza says, something is happening, so we see a turning point here. A stranger's features faintly start to twist before his eyes, a half-formed ghost. He remembers the cries. So something is happening, you'll already notice this is a short sentence. It adds drama and suspense. There's a turning point in the poem. This is indicated by the blunt and short sentence halfway through. It also suggests that he's not fully in control. He has ordered rows, he feels like a priest about to intone mass, but there's a lack of control in his job, and that puts him on edge. A stranger's features faintly start to twist before his eyes. This suggests that the development of the picture and the pain of the strangers only lasts moments. Tension is suggested with the word choice of twist. So faintly start to twist before his eyes also mimics the fact that perhaps when he was taking this photo, the stranger was actually twisting in pain. So again, it's showing this sense of pain and the fact that this photographer has moral conflict in himself, whether it's appropriate for him to photograph it or not. This person that he's photographed is likened to a half-formed ghost. So picture hasn't fully developed, but the man no longer exists because he's become a ghost. This man clearly died in whatever conflict zone the war photographer was at. So ghost has connotations of haunting, the idea that these images still haunt him. So it's imagery. This man is like a half-formed ghost, partly because he's already dead, but partly because the image still haunts the war photographer who's clearly suffering from PTSDs. The second part of the third stanza says how he remembers the cries of this man's wife, how he sought approval without words to do what someone must, and how the blood stained into foreign dust. So we're going to highlight how he sought approval without words to do what someone must. Now, he couldn't communicate with the wife, probably because this war zone was somewhere foreign, and he had to reply purely on looks. Like a priest, he had to attend to this man's final moments. His profession was calling him. The word choice of must is highlighted. This makes us question whether the speaker knows he has a choice in his profession or not. To us, it feels like he does not have a choice. He has a moral obligation to document these war zones, but at the same time, he does not help this dying man, so there's moral conflict there. We're now going to highlight blood-stained. This is word choice. Stain is something that's permanent, and it's always something that can't be easily forgotten. A stain is difficult to get rid of, just how this blood stained into foreign dust will always be remembered by him, if not the countries where these war zones happen. The first part of the last stanza to War Photographer says, 100 agonies in black and white, from which his editor will pick out 5 or 6 for Sunday's supplement. The reader's eyeballs prick. We see that it says 100 agonies. We're going to highlight that. There's word choice of agonies here. He could have used pain, but he doesn't. There's connotations of extreme pain instead. Agony seems like extreme suffering, something that lasts a long time. So it highlights the suffering of these people, but also the suffering of himself in his mind as he undergoes replaying these photos as he develops them in this room. The photos develop in black and white, from which his editor will pick out 5 or 6, because there's a careless indifference of the editor shown here, and how little the speaker feels. We care for the people suffering far away. It's more about money than lives in his eyes, and there's a sense of resentment again. So you could highlight the fact that the phrase pick out 5 or 6 as a phrase to highlight careless indifference. For Sunday's supplement, again, we see sibilance, which is the alliteration of the S sound. So alliteration is a repetition of any sound, any consonant sound. Here we're highlighting the S. This is how you spell it. This is a harsh sound, so it embodies the harsh reality that the Western world is too privileged to care about any conflict that isn't going on further away. Lastly, the reader's eyebrows prick. Now this is bathos, okay? So bathos is usually used at the end of a story or a poem during the climax to create an anti-climax, okay? So it goes from something quite severe, a very serious tone, to something that's almost mocking, almost resentful. So he's saying that the reader's eyeballs prick, but that's not enough. It's not enough to stop the conflict from happening. It's not enough to stop the photographer from seeing the pain that he has to photograph. So it's an insincere response from us. So the bathos picks this out. We feel pity for a while, and then we return to our overindulgent lives, which will go on from the final part of the last stanza. The last 3 lines of War Photographer say, with tears between the bath and pre-lunch beers, from the aeroplane he stares impassively at where he earns his living and they do not care. I would like you to highlight with tears between the bath and pre-lunch beers. Again, this is a repetition of bathos. It shows an insincere response from us, the public. We feel pity for a second, a while, and then we return to our overindulgent lives. There's a sense of resentment there. This tone of resentment is created by bathos. You're going to highlight from the aeroplane at where he earns his living and they do not care. So for the war photographer, this is the final part of his characterization. There's a growing acceptance that despite his efforts, his photos will make no difference. So although he tells himself that morally he must do this job, he must document the pain, he knows that they do not care. So if there's an acceptance that the public do not care, morally, is he doing this to raise awareness, or is he doing this for money? Lastly, he stares impassively. The word choice of impassively is used. Now remember, word choice is when the poet can use a certain word and they choose not to. So she's chosen to use the word impassively. This shows a lack of care, lack of empathy that is required as a war photographer. He doesn't emotionally register with the war scenes when he's there because he has to do the job. He cannot get emotional. Just as ironically, he doesn't emotionally register with his home. So the word choice of impassively almost highlights his sense of isolation. He doesn't quite feel like he belongs in either setting. As said before, this is the end of the video. Thank you so much for clicking on it. I hope this has helped you understand Carol Ann Duffy's War Photographer. Thank you for watching, and please feel free to like and subscribe.